Welcome to the Modern American Literature course, English 3293. This is a survey course, and it is one that is a companion course to 3283, which is the first half, roughly, or so people divide it up into that manner, of American literature. The first half of this two-course sequence runs from approximately the beginnings of English literature, that is, literature in the English language, on the North American continent, in that part of the North American continent that eventually became known as the United States, and it runs from about 1620 all the way to the Civil War. And traditionally, this course is the second part of that two-part sequence, picks up at the Civil War and goes through modern times. This course will cover much of the material in the realism and naturalism periods, modernism period, and instead of focusing a lot on postmodernism, what I do in the course is I focus on a regional set of writings, and in this case, Southern writing. And so we'll go all the way through about the 1940s or so, and then we'll transition into looking at 20th century Southern writers of various types. Find that more interesting. It's more in my background, and it gives us a chance to take a look at one region very, very carefully, a region that a lot of people from Texas, for example, have a great affinity for, or at least an interest in. So what we're going to do in this lecture is just very briefly, you have the notes for the lecture. They're posted on Blackboard, obviously, or you probably wouldn't be at this point right here, and hopefully you've read through them. That's the routine that we're going to go through each time we do this, is that I'm going to put most of my material in written form so that you have that in front of you at all times and can access it anytime you wish. And then I'm also going to offer some sort of brief, very brief, audio commentary for each one of those lectures. Sometimes the audio commentary will be one video, sometimes it will be two videos. In this particular lecture, there will be two videos. They should be side by side on my YouTube channel. I ought to be able to find them fairly easily, but do recognize that they'll be labeled Lecture 1 for both of those, Lecture 1, Slide 1, Lecture 1, Slide 2, and so on. And we'll do that with each one, but I normally won't have more than one or two, or maybe three slides at the most for each of our lectures. So the audio commentary is designed to be relatively brief. Each slide should be no more than 15 minutes in length. So what I want to do is start off a little bit and talk about what comes before this class. Well, we can't obviously go all the way back to Puritanism, although if you take the class you might enjoy that. One of the things that ought to be of note for most of you is the fact that the preceding literary movement that comes before where our class will pick up, the realism and naturalism period, would be Romanticism. And these are generally, this period is a time period where most people at least recognize a few of the authors' names, probably have read some of their works. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Edgar Allan Poe, Frederick Douglass, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Walt Whitman, Herman Melville, Louisa May Alcott. Those kinds of names usually kind of come to mind for some of you. At least have read some of that, and maybe even some great classics like The Scarlet Letter or Moby Dick or Telltale Heart or Leaves of Grass and those kinds of works. Well, as my lecture notes point out, there are some basic things that Romanticism, the Romantic movement in the United States, those works that belong to that movement have in common: an emphasis on extreme individualism and self-exploration. That's an outgrowth really of the Enlightenment period's emphasis on individuality and individual rights, for example. That's where our Declaration and our Constitution come from. The Enlightenment period, the newfound emphasis on individual freedoms, individual rights, which was an outgrowth of the 18th century. A deep interest in humanity's relationship with nature being very, very important, and a sort of tendency to spiritualize nature, to see God in nature, to see the divine creative power in nature. That's going to change a lot with realism, and we'll see how in a little bit. The use of symbolism and metaphor, very heavy on that, and a basic optimism about human nature. Now that's a really important thing. I mean, the whole notion that human nature, human behavior can be improved in this new land with a new way of government and a new people emerging. There was a deep-seated notion prior to the Civil War that this country, that human beings could be improved, that the human race could be improved potentially infinitely, and that this country is founded on the notion that it's our job and our mission to do that. So we look at important movements like the abolition movement and the women's rights movement, the temperance movement, the public education movement, all of these sorts of things, as things that were political in nature, but they were also philosophical in nature, because you don't believe in you don't believe in those causes unless you believe that human beings and their societies can be improved. And that's a very, very romantic notion, that human beings can be improved and that they are in charge of their destiny, and that we are in some instances destined to improve and become a better and better species, because we are noble and we are spiritual and we are divine. This is a thing that's going to change a lot with the realism period here, and we're going to talk about that especially in the next slide a little bit to try to prepare you for that. But this is a very important notion, because it is not a case that in the United States we went from Romanticism to realism. Oh, transitions aren't that easy. In fact, usually if you're a pop music fan, if one musical genre sort of dies out, it never fully goes away. It often fuses itself with some sort of new genre or new musical trend or fad. So rock and roll, for example, in the 1950s was kind of a fusion of blues and jazz, and in some cases country, even folk. And so, when you look at one era, or one literary movement or artistic movement or musical movement, and then you look at the next one that came after it, it's never the case that everything from the preceding movement or era was completely abandoned. And if you look at Americans today, as we'll point out as the class goes on, we're kind of a hybrid of our early Enlightenment and Romantic ideas, but also the realistic ideas and the naturalistic ideas that came to follow. I'm going to be bandying all these terms out and these movements out, but I'll define them for you and you'll see what they mean as we go along. Just remember that what comes before our class for this semester or this summer is the realism, the Romanticism movement, and these are a lot of the people that you know. And take a look at some of those characteristics that I pointed out there in our lecture notes. And then in the next slide, and in the next video, we'll go through some of the basics of realism and naturalism and why they are what they are.